She got pregnant for her ex while still married to her husband, but she doesn't know how to tell him. Tracy sat by the window, gazing out at the quiet street below. The rain had stopped, leaving the world damp and still. She could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, a constant reminder of how ordinary everything had become. But for Tracy, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The weight of what she was carrying inside her, both literally and emotionally, was too much to bear alone. Her hand rested gently on her stomach, the slight bulge of her pregnancy becoming more noticeable with each passing day. It wasn't just a physical change that haunted her. It was the truth behind it, who the father was. And that truth was a secret she could no longer keep. John, her husband, loved her deeply. He was kind, steady, and always there when she needed him. He provided for her, gave her comfort, and built a life for them together. Tracy had once believed that this was everything she had ever wanted. But as the years went on, things between them started to change. The passion that once existed had faded into routine, and with that routine came distance. Tracy didn't blame John entirely. Part of her knew that the absence of affection was as much her fault as his. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It was during one of those lonely nights, when John had to work late and Tracy found herself alone in their empty house, that Steve came back into her life. Steve was her ex-boyfriend, the one she had loved before she met John. They had shared a passionate love once, a love that had been full of laughter, of late-night conversations, of shared dreams. But life had gotten in the way, and they had drifted apart. Tracy married John, and Steve had moved on as well. They had only kept in touch through social media, exchanging the occasional like or comment. But something about seeing him again, even in the small, digital way, had sparked something in her. It started with a simple message, "Hey, how have you been?" And then, the conversation flowed easily between them. They shared memories of the past, talked about the present, and for a brief moment, Tracy felt alive again. She had missed the way Steve made her feel, the way he understood her without words. It was different from the way John loved her. John's love was steady, dependable, but it lacked the fire that she remembered from her time with Steve. One evening, Steve asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. Tracy hesitated but agreed. It was only coffee, she told herself. But deep down, she knew it was more. She knew it was a step she shouldn't take, yet something inside her was aching to feel alive again, to feel wanted. And so, they met. The coffee shop was quiet, the soft murmur of other patrons filling the air. Tracy sat across from Steve, staring into his eyes, and for a brief moment, she forgot about the world around her. They laughed, talked about the past, and for those few hours, the emptiness she had been carrying inside her seemed to disappear. When it was time to leave, Steve reached for her hand, and without thinking, Tracy allowed him to. Their kiss was like a storm, sweeping away everything in its path. It felt familiar, passionate, and for a moment, it was as if nothing had changed. They were the same people they had been before the marriage, before the routine, before the emptiness. But that moment didn't last long. Tracy knew that she had crossed a line she couldn't undo. She had been unfaithful, and the guilt settled into her heart like a heavy weight. She returned home that night, trying to push the memory of Steve's touch from her mind, but it lingered, haunting her every thought. Over the next few weeks, Tracy and Steve saw each other several more times. Each meeting, each touch, seemed to pull her deeper into a world that she knew wasn't hers to be a part of. But she couldn't stop herself. It was as if she had forgotten what she had with John, and instead, she allowed herself to get lost in the passion and excitement of what she had with Steve. And then, one night, after a quiet evening spent with Steve, Tracy realized that she was late. Her period was weeks overdue, and a sinking feeling grew in her chest. She had always been regular, and now, the possibility that she might be pregnant lingered like a dark cloud. She took a test. The result was clear. She was pregnant. And it wasn't John's baby. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Tracy sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the 2 pink lines on the test, unable to process the enormity of what she had just discovered. She was carrying Steve's child. And the worst part was that she had no idea what to do next. She hadn't told John about her affair with Steve. She hadn't even told him about the pregnancy yet. The thought of how he would react, how he would feel knowing that the child he had hoped to raise as his own wasn't his at all, terrified her. Tracy didn't know how to tell him. She didn't know if she even could. How could she shatter everything they had built together? How could she look him in the eye and tell him that she had been unfaithful, that she was carrying another man's child? And yet, there was a part of her that felt a deep, aching love for John, the kind of love that had sustained them through the years. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve the betrayal, the broken trust, the lies. He had been nothing but good to her, and now, she was about to ruin everything. But how could she keep the secret? How could she hide the truth from him, knowing that it would eventually come out? The guilt gnawed at her, each day a reminder that she was living a lie. As the weeks passed, Tracy withdrew more and more from John. She tried to maintain the facade of a happy marriage, but the weight of her secret made it harder and harder to pretend. John noticed the changes in her, the distance, the lack of affection, but he didn't know why. He asked her what was wrong, but she would only offer a quiet, "I'm just tired." The days turned into weeks, and soon, Tracy found herself at the brink of a decision. She could keep the secret and raise Steve's child in silence, hoping that John would never find out. But deep down, she knew that was impossible. Sooner or later, the truth would come to light, and when it did, it would destroy everything. Or, she could tell him. She could face the consequences of her actions, admit her mistakes, and hope that, somehow, they could rebuild what had been broken. But that would require a level of courage that Tracy wasn't sure she had. One evening, as Tracy sat on the couch, her hands resting on her stomach, John sat down beside her. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Tracy," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. "What's going on? You've been distant lately. You know you can talk to me, right?" Tracy felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to be honest, to confess her sins, to beg for his forgiveness. But the words wouldn't come. I'm just confused," she whispered. John nodded, his expression softening. "I know things have been tough lately. But we'll get through it, Tracy. We always do. We've been through worse." Tracy's heart broke at the tenderness in his voice. He didn't know. He didn't know how much she had hurt him. He didn't know the truth that she was keeping from him. But she couldn't bring herself to say it. Instead, she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For a brief moment, everything felt okay again. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and for that fleeting moment, Tracy remembered what love felt like, the comfort of being held, the power of embrace. But she knew that this moment couldn't last. The truth was waiting, and it would soon demand to be heard. And when it did, Tracy wasn't sure if she could bear the consequences. But she knew she had to face them, no matter how painful it might be. She had to find the courage to tell John the truth, because even though she had made a mistake, she still loved him. And in the end, love, true love, was the one thing that could heal even the deepest wounds.